Okay. Among the Thorns, Episode 2, take number, who knows? Who knows how many? But this is the take. This is the one I'm going with because my kids are going to be home soon, and then I won't be able to do this because they're loud. And so we're rolling with this one. Yeah, it's going to work. Quick disclaimer: this is, not professional advice, not intended to be. This is purely educational, inspirational, whatever you want to call it in that regard. We're going to get into the physical attacks that will come with the territory of pornography addiction. We briefly in the last episode talked about the three primary ways that pornography addiction will attack your life, that being physical, mental, and spiritual. We are now going to dig into that today, and we're going to kind of get into a couple of the distinct characteristics that would go along with the physical territory and a couple of tactics, how to defend yourself or so on and so forth. Now, kind of like I had said in the previous episode, I want to reiterate that pornography addiction takes something that is good, that is natural, turns it into something that is damaging. That's important to realize for various reasons that we'll either get into this time or next time. But in regards to that, a useful understanding is that sex is like fire. Okay, and a hopeful picture here of fire, because you didn't know what fire looked like. Now you do. So anyway, we know that fire is a powerful thing, right? Fire can provide light, it can provide heat, it can cook food, but it can also burn down a house. When you put it in the fireplace, it can illuminate or it can heat a home, right? Whereas if you put a fire in an attic, it's going to burn the entire house down. So in the same regard, sex is in the right place, at the right time. It's an incredible blessing, from the Christian perspective. Between a married, committed couple, in the marriage bed, sex is a blessing. It brings about good things in your life. It can bond, it can heal, it can relieve stress, it can increase connection. And of course, the rather obvious one, it creates offspring so that we can have little terrors running around that will look kind of like us and destroy our house. So it brings about good things. But it also, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, can destroy your entire life. So with pornography addiction, that is the fire that burns the house down. It's sexual material that's consumed in solitude, that's often of a very destructive type. It's abusive in nature, or it's perverse. And so we need to recognize the desires themselves are not the bad thing, right? It's pornography itself. It is what is evil. The attacks that the enemy mobilizes against us, those are the things that are evil. So you need to understand the desires can be good. Now, not all the desires, especially if you've struggled with pornography consumption for years, your desires will probably have morphed into something that is no longer just natural. We'll talk about that in a different episode. But the desires themselves at a base level, they are good and natural. They're just being weaponized to use against us. I want to quote C.S. Lewis here from the Screwtape Letters. If you've never read that, highly recommend it. C.S. Lewis, he wrote the children's books, the Chronicles of Narnia. But he also was just, in my opinion, a brilliant theologian. He wrote some stuff that I think is so deep. I really enjoy it. The perspective of Screwtape Letters, though, is really important to note, and that is that they are fictional, right? But they're from a perspective of demons in hell or whatever in the spiritual realm, writing to other demons, writing letters to give advice to their underlings or, advice from their bosses or whatever. And so this quote goes like this: all we can do is to encourage the humans to take the pleasures which our enemy, that would be God there, which our enemy has produced, at times, or in ways, or in degrees which he has forbidden. Hence, we always try to work away from the natural condition of any pleasure to that in which it is least natural, least redolent of its maker, and least pleasurable. An ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure is the formula. So I had to try to sound sinister when I did it. Anyway, but that's very, very much the nature of this behind the scenes. A lot of times you think of pornography addiction, all being about pleasure. And that's obviously a large component of it. That's a large component of the drivers of how it works with our mind, with the pleasure receptors of the brain, with dopamine and so on and so forth. But actually, that's not, I would not say, and from a lot of the studies I've seen, a lot of the testimonies, that's really not the primary driver of pornography addiction, is not just pleasure itself. It's a large component of it. But it's not the only thing. And so we see, in the Screw Tape letters, which I think do offer some interesting insight. You can tell he thought about it a lot. It's all about increasing craving, increasing desire, giving less pleasure back, so that you always progress to harder and harder content, chasing after higher hits of dopamine. And we'll talk about that in future episodes, because there are different ways that interacts with us. But anyway, few things in nature are as good and pleasurable as sex, right? But from the same token, when those natural desires are corrupted, they also can be one of the more damaging forces in nature, in our lives. If we think about it, they're one of the forces throughout history that have been used for a lot of evil. Wars have been caused by it because of affairs. The damage to families and to children because of abuse and because of just, not to get into dark territory, but we know the things that go on, right, in this world. Sex has caused a lot of problems. Does that mean sex is bad? Should we be like the Puritans of old and just discourage it at all times, unless to make a baby? Well, no, I don't believe so at all. I think the Bible is very clear on the fact that God created it as a blessing, as a good thing, with powerful effects in our lives that can be powerfully good. It's just powerful. So it can also be powerfully bad. When it comes to the realms of pornography addiction, that's the powerfully bad. So that's why we need to equip ourselves to deal with it, fight against it. So what are some physical attacks to be aware of? Number one, I would say, is an understanding that desire is not static. It doesn't stay the same. From the time you were a pubescent teenager and you got all these new hormones, you have not had the same level of hormonal desire, fortunately, because teenage years are horrifying at times. But our desire as well, even within the normal span of a year or whatever, our desire waxes and wanes like the moon. Sometimes our desires are asleep, almost, and other times they may be roaring like a bonfire. Sometimes we feel like, we got this. I'm never going to look at porn again. And then other times it will literally feel like, there's no way I couldn't. It's impossible. It is impossible. I will look at it. I don't want to look at it. I have to look at it. And it's not all to do with the physical desire, but you will note that at times you have a greater desire, and that is a natural component of your body. That's an important thing to recognize. There will be times where you will just have a greater difficulty resisting. And the important thing here is to learn yourself. Learn how you work. If you're younger and you happen to be watching this, if you're a teenager struggling with pornography addiction, you might have less clue of how you operate. If you're, 37 like I am, and you've lived for a little while, you're going to know pretty well, when you wake up in the morning and you're just kind of feeling you've got elevated desires, you're going to know you need to be careful those days, right? And so that's just something to be aware of. On that same note, it's also important to, as a tactic part of it, to understand that when things are bad, they're not going to stay bad. When your desire is at a peak, and you are at that point where it is really difficult to resist, it feels very much like those desires are never going to go away, that they are always going to be that powerful. That's what it feels like in your body. I'm sure you can relate to that, right? It feels like it's only going to get worse. And because of that, you have, how could I ever resist this? How could I avoid this? I have no choice but to fail. You have to recognize, though, that those desires will naturally wane. Persistence, perseverance, patience, stick with it, and you can weather the storm. And so that is one or two of the things I would say right off the bat. Another physical attack, which I'm going to end with because I didn't want to make these videos very long, is external stimuli. That's a big one. That's an apparent one. That's one we all know. You're driving down the freeway and there's a big billboard with women in their lingerie advertising for the adult store downtown. Or you are in the department store and you're going by I'm going to be talking from a guy's perspective for most of these, even though a lot of times this is very applicable both ways. But, I'm walking by the women's underwear section and there's all the pictures of women, scantily clad. It's a simple thing, but it's obvious that those are going to trigger desires in you. You need to be aware of that. The desire itself can be natural, but that doesn't mean that the external stimuli that feeds that desire is unavoidable. Now, in the world we live in, sex sells. It's abundant. It's everywhere. So yes, you're going to have a difficult time. That's all the more reason we have to stay even more built up, well equipped to deal with it. And my brain. No, I said this was going to be the tape. I'm moving on. Okay. So you may not be able to change the environment that you live in, but you can change how you react to it. The tactics that you wield in when you see something, when you recognize, okay, this is going to be a problem, how you respond to that. I'm going to give just one example this time to keep this short. And that is that, okay, so I sometimes like anime. They're Japanese style cartoons. It literally just means cartoon, I think, in Japanese. And so I like them because of the fight scenes. Realistically, they have really big over the top fight scenes, planets being blown up. And it's kind of fun stuff. But unfortunately, there's also another part of that. And it's not in all of the anime, but it's kind of stereotypical, and that is they draw the women very curvy. They draw them not wearing enough clothes, so on and so forth. And I remember a time when I was watching a particular show, and I was watching it for the story. It really was. Had really good fight scenes, and it also, though, it had bits where there wasn't any nudity, there wasn't anything like that, but it was very revealing attire on the stupid cartoon women. It's weird to me that a cartoon, that's the way our, especially men, we're so visually built that we will see a cartoon drawing of a curve and it will stimulate a desire in us. It's so bizarre. I'll talk about that later. But anyway, we'll see that and it activates desire in us. Well, I was watching this show and I was thinking, well, I'm not watching it for those parts. I'm watching it for the fight scenes. I'm watching it for the story. I'm an adult. Come on. Well, I would watch it. I would even skip the parts. I'd skip the parts that I thought were a little bit risque. But then I would notice after I'd watched it, a whole week, my desires were elevated. If I watched it a couple times in a week, just seeing those things, the increase of desire was noticeable over time. I had to realize, okay, sure, I like it for the story, but it's not worth it. It's not worth it if it tempts me to sin. And so I stopped watching it, you know. And so to this day, I won't watch ones that are that particular style because I just know that it does me no good, right? Even if the fight scenes are good, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so yeah, pay attention to your internal desires and those external stimuli. Those are just a couple minor tools to add to your toolkit, right? We'll discuss things later on that will intersect with the physical component, but those are two of the main characteristics of that. And I want to end this, though, with a scripture that you can take with you that hopefully, you know, memorize these things. The Word of God is more powerful than any two-edged sword. And so it absolutely can be used to defend yourself and cut away things in your life that you don't need to be there. So in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11, it reads, "Beloved, I urge you, as foreigners and strangers, to abstain from fleshly lusts, which wage war against the soul." How that ties into what we're saying here, recognize those external stimuli. You know, a different translation says to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against your very souls. Recognize those things that are going to tempt you and avoid them when you can. And good luck. You don't need luck. You need God's Spirit with you. You need to be well equipped, and I need to finish this video. So thank you for sticking with me if you did. If you happen to stumble onto this, please subscribe so you can see the others coming up. I will be bringing a lot of information on this topic, as well as others that you know, try to tear down your life. So thanks for being here, and see you next time.